Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the foundation and what we do, and then lead into the circular economy thinking and hopefully make very clear the relationship between what we do at the foundation and the circular economy and how that does relate to the SDGs. For those of you who don't know about the foundation, we were established in 2010 with the explicit purpose of accelerating the circular economy. We work with businesses, we work with governmental bodies, we work with education. About a third of what we do is in the education space. And we essentially do two things. We develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. And secondly, we establish collaboration platforms and drive what we refer to as catalytic innovation initiatives. The New Plastics Economy work is an example of that, which I'll talk about briefly. So what else we've done with the foundation, we believe, is to establish a pretty clear vision of what an economy could become that could become or could be viable and thriving in the long run. And we not only have created a vision of what an effective and productive economy can be, but we've also spent the last 6 years quantifying that and putting the economic rationale in place, not only for companies, but also for governmental bodies as well. So you've heard several times, I think, over the course of today and yesterday, the question of how do we actually build an economic rationale that provides pull for companies to engage in this topic, and that's essentially what we've spent a lot of time working on. So let me just give you a sense of what we think the circular economy is and what that economic rationale is. If you think about what we have today as an economy, you can characterize it as being linear. That is, we take materials out of the ground, we produce products, we use them for a very short period of time, and then we dispose of them into landfill or incineration. And that means that for every new product that we make, every new building that we build, every new vehicle, every new fast-moving consumer good requires new material inputs. So we have to extract materials and to put those into those products. That what we do at the end of the pipe after use is we try to recover some of this value through recycling, and we've been doing this now for 40-odd years, and the extent to which we have been successful is really very minimal. We get fractional returns at the end of use, so to date, from recycling. And that's primarily because we don't have systems designed for collecting, sorting, reprocessing. We don't design and think about products in terms of what happens to them post-use. Therefore, they get mixed up together. We have to separate them out. They get designed in a way that makes them very difficult to reuse, repair, recycle, remanufacture. So the yields post-use are very, very small. And as a rough rule of thumb, you could actually say roughly 95% of the value of everything that we produce is lost within a very short period of time, well within 10 years. So waste is chronically high. We have massive waste at the end of use, at the end of life of products. But we also actually have massive waste structurally in the system. So if you think about things like cars or food systems or mobility, built environment, any one of those you can demonstrate massive structural waste. Cars, for example, in Europe are parked 95% of the time. When they are used, they typically have, on average, 1.5 people in them. Only a very, very small fraction of the energy that's put into vehicles actually goes into moving them. In the built environment, we know in Europe from analysis that we've done that commercial buildings are empty 30 to 50% of the time on the busiest time of the week. So commercial vehicles are grossly underutilised, and there's a massive amount of residential real estate stock that's also empty. And if we think about food systems, you've heard, I think, several times as well, that from farm to fork, there's around about 30% of food waste through the system. So the loss is massive. If we think about fast-moving consumer goods as a category, we put $3.2 trillion worth of materials into FMCG every single year, and $2.8 trillion of that ends up in landfill or incineration within 1 year. Massive, massive loss. So a circular economy, by comparison to a linear economy, is quite different. What we define as a circular economy is one that is restorative and regenerative by design. And what we're aiming to do is to keep products, components and materials at their highest value and utility at all times. And the circular economy isn't about zero waste or about more effective recycling. It's really, at its heart, about eliminating the concept of waste. And what we're seeking to do is to have materials in the economy ultimately re-entering the economy as defined valuable nutrients that are technical or biological in nature. Some of you may have seen this diagram. We refer to it as the butterfly diagram, and what it describes is two cycles. On the right-hand side of the diagram we have the technical sphere. On the left-hand side we have the biological sphere. And if we think about material flows in these technical and biological categories, what we're seeking to do in the technical sphere is to keep those finite technical materials, the polymers, the metals, the fibres, keep those in circulation. And we describe a series of loops. And you can see there we've got an inner loop that is about sharing. We talk about the reuse in the second loop. We talk about remanufacturing. And then ultimately at the outer loop we have recycling. And what we've found in our analysis is that the inner loops, the ones that are closer to the centre, have vastly more value in them than the outer loops. And in fact, recycling is the least valuable way to recover materials and to increase utility. If we think about things like remanufacturing, we can actually recover in a remanufactured engine around about 80% of the materials, the water, the embedded energy. We can actually, and we have cases to show this, we can have companies that are selling the products that are remanufactured for 30% less, making 50% more profit, and customers receiving a better quality product ultimately because the bugs and the challenges of the new product have been worked through and worked out. We can also see in here the notion of sharing economy, and this is really a very interesting digitally enabled phenomena that we've seen. So examples like Zipcar or Airbnb have their challenges, but what they do demonstrate is that with digital technologies now we can actually access, make visible and utilise the idle capacity and valorise that very successfully. So on the right-hand side in the technical spheres, consumers become users. And we think about consumption only in terms of if you eat it. So you're not actually a consumer if you're using technical materials. On the left-hand side, we've got the biological sphere, and this is where we have the opportunity to be regenerative and to cascade biological materials and to get value from them in many different ways. So cascading of biological materials would be, for example, clothing that is reused as clothing, then used as stuffings, then used as insulation before it's then used for energy recovery. So we use the materials multiple times. But the biological side also, we talk about things like biorefinery, anaerobic digestion. We talk about the notion of farming that is regenerative by design as well, so that we're actually reconnecting nutrient loops back to the farm and getting nutrients back to the soil. So there are hundreds and hundreds of cases. I've given you a few already, but you can find many, many more of these on our websites in the analysis and reports that we've done. And they range from products as service, where we're seeing products like washing machines now digitally enabled and selling washing in terms of the actual service of having clean clothing as opposed to actually buying a washing machine. Now these service models are really very interesting because the companies that provide the products as service are able to get the products back at the end of use, remanufacture and put them back into the market again, keeping those materials in circulation. The bottom left example is a company called Splosh in the UK who has totally rethought the system of packaging for cleaning products. So you buy a plastic bottle once and then you receive these, what they refer to as slugs, that you put into the bottle, and the plastic is bioplastic that dissolves. So you don't ship water long distances, you get reuse of the plastic bottle, and you have a service that's internet enabled so that you can have these products delivered to your doorstep very easily. And on the right-hand side, the remanufacturing Caterpillar is a very good example of remanufacturing, and remanufacturing and the use of products as services in remanufacturing is a well-established B2B phenomena. And as I said, it's incredibly efficient in recovering and use of materials, and also in terms of its economics. So the Foundation has produced a series of reports, and this is a sample of them. The first two that we did demonstrated that there was about $1 trillion of material substitution value through the application of these levers in the fast-moving consumer goods and durable goods markets. The reports evolved over time such that we moved from just looking at material substitution to starting to look at the effects and the value that can be recovered when we look at externalities and other factors, which I'll take you through. In particular, the report we did for the European Union 2 years ago, or 2015 actually, was one where we looked at mobility, built environment and food systems in Europe, which represent about 80% of material flows in Europe and 60% of household expenditure. What we wanted to demonstrate was that this is not an issue of just maintaining materials at their high value, but it's actually an issue of core competitiveness for Europe, who is a mass importer of materials into their economy. And what we demonstrated was that through really very extensive modelling, where we had 150 companies participating in the study, and we had 5 universities working on the modelling with us, is that if we look forward and we see the technological advancements coming into the economy to 2030, and we just project what the efficiency gains will be, there's about a $900 billion cost reduction in the system that you can see as the middle bar there. And that's distributed across the material substitution, across the cash out costs, and we've also estimated in here externalities. But what's really interesting about this is that if we apply the circular economy thinking over and above the efficiency agenda that many people have, and the reductive agenda, that is the reducing the current harm or the harm of the current system, if we apply the circularity levers, we can double the value that's extracted by 2030. So the circular economy represents an opportunity for Europe of about $1.8 trillion just in those 3 sectors that I referred to. This gathered a lot of attention in Europe, and we have seen now the establishment of regulatory change and the establishment of the EU Directorate on circular economy. And again, it's seen as a core economic agenda and one around the issue of competitiveness. And I just wanted to show you these graphs briefly to demonstrate that when we start to look at things like GDP or household expenditure, or we look at the social costs, the externality costs, or the CO2 emissions, or the primary resource inputs, all of these factors are significantly increased when we apply circular economy levers. So CO2, for example, by 2030, we can see a 48% reduction over and above the current trajectory. If we think of material inputs into the system, we can see a 32% reduction. So they're very significant. And we've recently just replicated this analysis for India, and we're launching this report next week, which looks at exactly the same 3 categories: the built environment, mobility and vehicle construction, and food systems. And we found very, very similar results. So for India, we see that the opportunity to 2050 in this case is about a $620 billion cost reduction opportunity. And it represents the ability to reduce greenhouse gases by 22% by 2030 and 43% by 2050. The link here with the SDGs, I think, is really very obvious, not only in terms of greenhouse gases, but also in terms of water usage. We see 19% lower in 2030 with the application of circular-economic levers. When we think about things like synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, we see a 45% reduction by 2030. And again, if we look at virgin material construction, it's about a 24% reduction in the production and consumption areas. So very significant reductions. And for markets like India, emerging markets, we also see this as a really interesting concept because there are many aspects of circular economics already in place in these markets where they have in their agricultural systems much closer connection and they haven't industrialised the food systems as far as many other markets. Now the combination of circular economic thinking and digital application of digital technologies, we believe present an opportunity for India to modernise its food system without necessarily industrialising it. And this is a really significant opportunity that we haven't had the benefit of being able to do it this way in the past. I talked also about the regulatory enablement. What we've also done is to produce toolkits for regulators so that when we are in discussions with governments and cities and regions, we can talk quite specifically about how they can think about forming good regulation to enable circular economics to come about. And it's not just about regulation, it's also about the establishment of collaboration platforms, business support systems, information awareness, so all of the levers that a government has to bring these ideas to life. And finally, as a study, I just wanted to talk about the new plastics economy work that we've been doing as well. And Eric mentioned this yesterday, the work that we've been doing really was founded on the basis of us wanting to understand plastics as a global material flow. We worked for about 3 years to produce this report. We released it in Davos this past year. And of all the reports that have ever been released at Davos, this is the one that received the most media coverage. And what it really demonstrated is quite starkly that as a human endeavour over the past 40 years, the notion of trying to recycle end of pipe has fundamentally failed. If we think about the global plastics material flow, there's around 300 million tonnes of plastics produced annually. 78% of that is in plastics packaging. Of the 78 million tonnes that are produced, we only collect 14% globally for recycling. 4% is lost in the sorting process, 8% is downcycled for one more single use before it's landfilled or incinerated, and only 2% currently loops back into the value chain. And this is after 40 years of effort. Not only that, our analysis shows that this situation is getting worse, not better, because we've got increasing fragmentation in the system through innovation that is making the system more complex rather than actually consolidating it. And we've got variation in raw material prices that also damage the economics. The other interesting stat here was the 32% of all of the plastics packaging that is produced annually leaks into the natural environment, leading to the statistic that by 2050, we will have more plastics in the ocean by weight than fish on the current trajectory. So what the new plastics economy has done is really look at this different approach to partnerships that came up in the previous panel. What we've done is we've actually brought together the actors from across the value chain, the polymer manufacturers, the producers of packaging, the brands, the governments, cities who are involved in the collection, sorting and reprocessing. And what we're looking at is 5 specific activities that we focus on together in order to design a system that actually can work. And this is a very, very different approach to looking at end-of-pipe behaviour change efforts or collection schemes, beach cleanups and the like. This is about a fundamental systemic redesign and getting all of the actors involved across the system who are able to do that. And we believe quite firmly that if we don't bring all of these actors together and have very close engagement with the companies who are able to and need to redesign their products and service both to capture the value and to achieve the systemic change, we will not be successful in delivering the goals that we're seeking to deliver through the SDGs. So the foundation works with all of these actors, and you can see some of these here. We have around about 120 companies that we work with globally, an extensive university network and group of other academic partners. And you can find all of the materials and all of the analysis that we produce on our webpage and in our news channel called Circulate, or you can go to the Disruptive Innovation Festival that's currently running this week and also find extensive materials on this topic. So thank you very much. To explore some of these ideas further, what we have pulled together is, I think, a very interesting panel to discuss this. And I'll invite the panelists to come up to the stage, if you wouldn't mind. We have four panelists joining today. Hui Mien from IKEA, who's the Head of Sustainability for Southeast Asia. Roel Westerbeck, President of Amcor Flexibles in Asia Pacific. Peter Wong, who's the President of Dow Asia Pacific. And Mark Cliff, who is the Chief Economist for ING Bank. The foundation works with all four of these organisations, actually, and what I would like to suggest is that we just spend a few minutes having each of the panellists talk a bit about the circular economy in terms of their organisation's perspective and the sorts of things that they're actually looking at. And just before we do that, I'd just like you to keep in mind that there are really four building blocks for creating circular economic systems. And I think we will talk about these a bit on the panel, but the four of them are that we need to think about materials and materials design as a very important part of this notion of designing for circularity. That's the first one. The second one is that in order to get materials back and to capture the value that I referred to, we need to think about different business models and different approaches to this whole topic. The third thing is about getting stuff back at the end of use. And there are a variety of ways in which we can do that, either through closed loop systems where companies control the materials by having, for example, products as services, the washing machine example I gave earlier, but also very importantly, we need public infrastructure and we need collection systems that allow us to collect and sort and redirect these materials back into the economy. So that's the take-back loops. And finally, there's the fourth bucket of building blocks, which we refer to as enablers. So these are things like digital technologies, regulatory environment, education, etc. So just keeping those in mind, what I'd like to do is just to run down the line, actually, and I might just start at the far end, if that's okay. So we'll start with actual real products and in a retail context. And if you wouldn't mind just talking a bit about your story and what you do and IKEA's thinking around this topic.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Andrew. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Hui Mien. I'm from IKEA. Today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what IKEA envisioned circular economy would be for our brand. So IKEA, to start with, we have a vision of a better everyday life for the many people. So that has always been the mantra of how IKEA has developed over the past 70+ years. And as we expand and go into many new markets, looking at where the emerging economy are, we want to bring IKEA products to as many people as possible and also at an affordable price. So when we were looking into this, we realized that the linear model that IKEA has been operating on will no longer be able to fulfill what we want given the situation that we've got today from a technical material perspective. So as we look into it, a circular IKEA then becomes a need for us to move and transit into that. So what do we mean by a circular IKEA? Typically today, a lot of people come through the stores, consumers like yourself, customers like yourself. You buy a product from IKEA, you pay for it, and then you go out from the stores. then you have to think about what do you do with it after the end of life. When we look at that, we think that moving into circular IKEA, there's a few things that we need to re-look into how we do business. And that's not just a change, but it's more of a fundamentally re-look at how we've been built up, how we design products all the way to how do we actually take back the product so that it fits back to the loop. And then that's how we would bring circular IKEA to reality. So there's 3 different areas that we look at. The first one is, of course, I think we need to have the ability to develop products that have better, longer lifespan. So we need to design for circularity, whether it's a product that we look at, and there's a few ways to design for circularity. First of all, it's a design for modularity, where we know that so a product at the end of life does not have to be thrown away, but more like how can we extend that product use from a consumer perspective. Give you an example. Recently, we just launched a new sofa, Voluntuna, in every market. So that is I would say, the first modular design products that we have. It essentially comes in every single building blocks. So you don't buy a whole sofa anymore, but you decide how many seaters do you need, and then you pick one seat by itself. Even the backrest, the height of the backrest, and the armrest, everything you decide. It's a little bit of building your own sofa. So we go with the tagline to say that that will be the last, it might be the last sofa that you ever buy. Because with the modularity, you can then, regardless of whether you move house, you can downsize and upsize as per you like. And also when it comes to, usually in sofa, when you find that you no longer, it's justified with a sofa, it's because certain areas tend to get much softer than the rest. So from that perspective, you can also just pick up that additional component and replace it. So that's where we think from a product perspective, we need to design our products to have that prolonged product life cycle. The second bit, it's really being able to look at how can we take back these products. If we want to do circularity, we need to have a source of products to come back into our resource chain. So our stores needs to really be ready. We need to have different avenues and collection, reverse logistic, that we would be able to have enough material that fits into the amount of production that we need. And the third bit, it's really the ability to recycle, the resource change issue, where the ability to recycle back these products. Because today, when we have our products out there, whether when we take back a table or a shelf, they're in different colors, different additive coatings are been added on it. So we do need technologies that are able to enable that to happen. And I think circular IKEA is definitely the direction that we're going. And so in the various markets right now, we are testing different concepts to look at how consumer would actually react to that. So in one of the European market, for example, they are starting to have spare parts sales to look at if your IKEA products loses one screw or have something else, you can actually go back. So that's done by IKEA Spain. You would be able to buy components starting from next year. And right now, there's also other different markets testing different things. We've already have reselling of IKEA products in the France and Belgium market, where a consumer can actually send us a picture. They don't have to come down to the store. Send us a picture of the products that they would like to put for resale. And then we will give them advice on whether that's possible or not possible before they bring it down to the store. So I think one of the biggest benefit that we think by going into that, it's not only just from a material perspective, but it's really about that additional touch points that you have to give to your consumer, because your consumer then will not just be a one-time off consumer. Your consumer will keep on coming back to you, because if they want to repair products, they come back to the store again. If they want to refurbish their product, they want to sell the second-hand products, they come back to the store again. So it's this unique touch point, and the ability for us to collect data and knowing what are actually the customer returning, what actually does not work well. If a certain part keeps breaking down, we know we sell a lot of that for component. Maybe we need to rechange the design. So from that perspective, we are still working really hard towards circular IKEA, and hopefully one day in all markets we would be a 100% circular IKEA model.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fascinating. And there are a number of other companies like IKEA that we're working with who have similar stories and are starting to put in place targets and objectives as companies to become circular. And some of them go so far as to say that we will be 100% circular by 2025 or thereabouts. And these are very challenging targets because there is a lot of linear momentum to actually work through. But very, very nice case. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Peter, Dow Chemicals work in a variety of fields, and we're working together on the new plastics economy work. Would you like to talk a bit about what you're doing?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's always very interesting to sit next to IKEA because I've always been a loyal customer of IKEA.
Thank you so much.
It's very pleased to know you guys are doing much more on sustainability, so I can keep buying more products from IKEA, right? Dow Chemical, from a company perspective, we're further upstream than IKEA. All right, Dow is a 118 years history company, and our name has always been Dow Chemical. Actually, in the last 10 years or so, we have been transforming ourselves, and now we're much appropriate called the Dow Material Science Company. And that material science company really is very applicable to the drive of sustainability in terms of advancing the circular economy, because all the sustainability drive to excellence, you do require to have an expert to be sitting in a design table and start looking at what materials you require so that your end use, whether it's reuse or whether it's longer use, is going to be having the right materials to be in the design. So for that matter, our latest 10 years goal on sustainability, which we just rolled out last year, it's our 2025 sustainability goal. There are 3 focus areas. Number 1, we continue to work on our footprints. Our footprints meaning we have a lot of manufacturing sites, and we'll continue to reduce our emission, reduce our waste, and optimize the energy consumption. And that's the footprint. It obviously will have a significant impact on the communities that we operate in. Second is the handprints. Handprints is start using our product and technologies to provide solutions to drive circular economy with our direct customers. I can give you a couple of interesting examples. You mentioned about washing machine. A couple of years ago, we worked with a white goods customer in China, and we developed a washing machine which can use 30% less water, but get rid of the 99% of the bacteria. So that is a call from the customer trying to drive us a sustainability excellence and consuming much less water than we used to. And this is a joining design of the Dow technology, water purification technology in the washing machine. So that's really the handprints. We'll continue to work on that. But the next 10 years, very interesting, from 2016 onwards to 2025, we want to work on the blueprints. The blueprints is not only working technology and development with your direct customers. We want to work across the value chain. We want to work across the value chain so that the touch point can be our friends in IKEA and our friends in the government and in various cities within China, Asia Pacific. There are a couple interesting things we're working on. Number 1 is from farm to table, from farm to fork. And we found that actually, if you can combine all the Dow technologies, elevate yourself beyond the business unit, go beyond the boundaries, elevate yourself to the chemistry, physics, biology level, then you found that actually you have a lot of solutions that you can tack into this whole chain from farm to fork. And we're working very hard on that. And I think it's drawing a lot of attention with governments and industry associations and our industry partners as well, because no one single company can provide a total solution. And another example is working on energy efficiencies. And specifically, we're working very hard in China, because in China, 40% of the energy got leaked from commercial buildings and condominiums, apartments, because of insufficient insulation. It can be a very simple problem to fix, but it can be very complex, because then the magic word of funding comes in. How do you get enough funding to drive a massive change in a country like China? So we're working on that, what we call the green building solutions now. So, you know, we're working very hard into driving our business operation to be more aligned to sustainability. Now, I like to close my comments on a couple changes that happen internally. So far, I've been talking about external customers, value chain stakeholders. We have to go through a significant change within our own organization because the days of inside out, produce what you can produce and sell what you have produced is over. Because if you continue to focus on that dilemma, you're going to be marginalized quickly, not only in China, but Asia Pacific and outside, right? So what we're doing now is market back. By market back, this meaning we're asking all our commercial business teams, when you go out and talk to your customers and in government, stop talking. How about start listening to where the problems are? Because guess what? If you call yourself solution provider, I always challenge my team. You will never be a solution provider unless you understand what the problem is, right? And can you imagine the problem, or do you have to listen carefully to understand what the problems are, right? Customers, value chain partners, they don't care how many products you can produce. What they care is, this is my problem, and therefore, do you have a solution for it? So it requires a lot of change internally, so that's what we're working on.
What do you, when you think about the efficiency examples that you gave and contrast that to the notion of restorative and regenerative by design, what do you see as the biggest challenge to move beyond sustainability, which in many examples is about a more efficient linear system that does less harm, to something that is circular?
Right. Well, first of all, it's about, I think it's very important we talk about partnership and collaboration. Now, in Dow, in Asia Pacific, what we're trying to do is, let's not separate collaboration and innovation. Those are not separable. And we put them together, we call it a program called Collaborative Innovation. So you're not going to close the door in your R&D labs and start innovating for what needs in the next 5 years, because you won't know. The collaborative innovation, meaning first listen, and then start innovating something which is very relevant. And we make it a rule that anything which is not relevant to what the needs of our stakeholders, you don't go back to your lab and work on it. Okay? We have core R&Ds in our headquarters in the US working for the next 10 years or so. But in Asia Pacific, let's make sure we're addressing the immediate challenges. That's number one. Number two is the day of treating sustainability as a separate function is over. We don't have a sustainability function. Sustainability is in the Asia Pacific strategy, and we changed the name. Instead of sustainability, we call it sustainability in action. So this is about implement. This is not about understanding the corporate strategy and put in your personal goal saying, I attended the training classes. That's over, right? So sustainability in action. My dream, you know, in my Asia Pacific strategy is one of these days there will be no more sustainability word in the business strategy. Because in a manufacturing-oriented company like Dow, safety, EH&S will always be the DNA. We don't need to talk about safety. That's something we do every day. Our day will come when sustainability becomes like safety.
Okay, great. Roloff, Amcor has an amazing story, and I'd be keen for you to tell that, but also to come back to the challenge I just gave Peter as well, and how do we think about, you know, shifting from reducing the impact of products in the market to actually getting to systems that are restorative and regenerative.
Right. For those of you who do not know Amcor, most likely you're exposed to our products because we are one of the largest packaging companies in the world, and in plastic packaging, flexible packaging, we are the largest. So we touch a lot of the food that you buy in the supermarkets, or the medicines that you take, home and care products. The good news about packaging is that we talked in this session about food waste. The good thing is that packaging protects food, and food waste being a huge issue and a huge emitter of carbon. 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions is because of food waste. So overall, packaging is not a bad thing. And if you want to package products, then flexible packaging is by far the most efficient compared to glass or metal. So in itself, I think packaging is not a bad thing. But what is a big dilemma, and it's visible for everybody, is, and you spoke about it in your speech, is what do we do with the packaging after we use it, okay? And looking at Amcor, rightfully so, what you say, how do we make the transition from focusing on our own footprint to becoming circular in the products that we sell? So indeed, a lot of the focus has been on our own footprint, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, water use, water intensity, waste to landfill by very substantial numbers, several of tens of percent over five years. And we will continue to do that. But the challenge for us, I think the challenge for the whole industry in packaging, for raw material suppliers such as Dow, Dow is a supplier to us, ourselves, the FMCGs, the consumer, how do we ensure that a system which is very linear at the moment, how do we make sure that that becomes circular? And there is a couple of things that we're doing in that respect. So first of all, I think as a leading packaging manufacturer, we see it as not only a corporate responsibility, but it will become a business imperative that we start working on it, that we start fixing the problem. But the issue is that the problem is very complex because it involves all players in the chain. It involves raw material suppliers, it involves us, customers, FMCGs, but it also implies that we need to work with governments. And a couple of things and that's why also we teamed up with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, is how do we come to a system in which we reuse, we recycle, we use energy that is stored in packaging to come back into the system. And the criticality is the collection. So how do we come to systems that we collect the packaging that is being used and bring it back into a circular way? And it starts with design for recyclability. A lot of the packaging that we use today is very difficult to recycle. So one of the things that Amcor is working on, to start already with the design of the packaging, to make packaging that has very good barrier properties and aesthetical properties, but can be recycled. In other words, no more combination of plastics and aluminum in the packaging, because that's difficult to recycle. So it starts in working together with the raw material suppliers to design for circularity. If you start thinking about it at the end of the chain, it's too late. It needs to be a holistic approach throughout the value chain. So that's where we start. Another example that we could give is working with customers, working with suppliers, that we reduce the weight of packaging. That might not sound so sexy, but we have technology to reduce PET bottles by 25%. Now, looking at your picture, there is a lot of leakage. So if everybody would use 25%, that's already a big impact. And we are engaging in discussions with yourself, with the Ocean Conservancy, with the Trash Free Sea Alliance, to team up with governments to see how we can address this. And especially in Asia, that is a big issue. And it's a system where we need to start thinking about, can we come with certain incentives? Because the problem of recycling at the moment, or the lack of recycling, is there is not a business incentive to do right now for flexible packaging. Recycling costs money. The European countries, Germany, the Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries, have solved this by a fee structure, the green dot fee structure, okay, that enables money to flow back. But in Asia, that has not existed. So we need to start thinking about what kind of legislation do we need, what kind of incentives do we need. We would have, I think, a couple of the problems already solved if we would make CO2 much more expensive. I think that fundamental problem that we have today in recycling is that raw materials are far too cheap. Now, if we negotiate with Dow on raw materials, that's not what we say, but that's, I think, a problem of society at large. Raw materials are so cheap that there is insufficient incentive to recycle. If the cost of carbon would go from €8 per ton, as it is today, to 500 euros per ton, all of a sudden the incentives would entirely change, okay? So by and large, we are in the process of moving from reducing our own footprint to having a clear acknowledgement that this 8 to 10 million tons of plastics that we throw into the ocean, we have a responsibility to play together with our partners in the industry.
Very good. So Mark, changing gears, ING Bank, and ING has been involved in the topic of circular economy quite a lot, and perhaps you would like to share some of ING's experience.
Sure. Well, I think we've been inspired by your own work, I would say, and obviously, as a chief economist, I'm particularly interested in the macro consequences of this, so I'll come back to that perhaps a bit later. But in terms of what ING is doing, we are, of course, embodying these principles in our own activities and our own operations, but we're not a manufacturer, so I don't think we're going to save the world on our own. And where we come in, I think, is much more in the financing of circular economy initiatives, whether it's investments or in loans. And in that respect, a couple of days ago, we, along with a number of other partners, launched a new initiative called the Sustainable Finance Collective Asia. So please take a look at the website there. And the essential point here is that what we have discovered is that actually there isn't a lot of demand for loans for circular economy initiatives, because the big corporations you see to my left here have got their own money. They don't particularly need ours. And if anything, some of the smaller outfits that are involved in the circular economy need equity. Not just loans. So we're looking at evaluating proposals that people come forward with through this initiative, and hopefully accelerate the development of the circular economy and indeed other sustainable initiatives. That aside, obviously I run the research operation, so obviously we're very grateful for your foundation's work there, and we sort of build on that in terms of looking at the financial aspects, and we issued a report a couple of years ago called Financing the Circular Economy, which you're all welcome to take a look at. And essentially this is sort of transformative for finance as well, because if we move towards products as a service, it's not the producer selling it, they actually continue to own it, and that clearly changes the cash flows, it increases the size of the balance sheet, it changes the nature of risk. And so all of these things we're sort of working through. It's sort of increasing the complexity, if you like, of the financing. Although the flip side of that, of course, is from a user perspective, they get the benefits of this. It's shortening their balance sheet, it's changing their cash flows in the opposite direction. So, there are, as it were, sort of winners and losers from a financial perspective. So we're doing a lot of work on that. But I do want to come back a little bit to this question of the lack of demand, because certainly from where I sit, and I think this bears out some of the comments we've already heard, the linear economy is still growing faster than the circular economy, sadly. Part of that is just a sort of natural demographic. If you think about the growth of the middle class, not least here in Asia, this is phenomenally increasing the demand for resources, and washing machines seem to have come up on several occasions here, and there are some excellent initiatives that we've heard about, but the fact is washing machines are also too cheap. They're not worth repairing for a lot of consumers. So there is clearly a public policy issue there as well in terms of changing the regulation, changing the incentive structure. I'm glad you mentioned incentives, because as an economist we're keen on that kind of thing, because it is the case that consumers in general are not prepared to pay a big premium for circular products. So that leaves us back into the question of innovation. Again, we've heard a lot about that on this panel. For us, innovation and sustainability are core parts of our strategy, but they're inseparable. And I think the really good news here is that the technologies are now sort of coming on stream pretty rapidly. Some of them have exponential qualities, and I'm thinking in particular of some of the digital technologies that facilitate the sharing economy. And I'll just give you one example, because we've done a little bit of work on the impact of driverless cars from a macro perspective. As you mentioned earlier, cars sit around doing nothing for 96% of the time. If you have driverless cars, you could probably increase the utilization of the car fleet by 15-fold. oh, and by the way, you could increase the utilization of the roadways fourfold. So you just think about that in terms of the impact on resource utilization. It's phenomenal, and this is all digitally enabled, and of course we hope indeed that these cars will be running on renewable energy. So okay, they are still a number of years away, but these are things that we need to build towards and encourage the development of.
Very good. So we have a range here from the value chain. The finance piece is clearly a very important part. You talked about the role of regulation, and it's come up a lot as well, I think, yesterday, the discussion of needing to have the participation of governments in a way that is more sophisticated than just putting in place policies and bans. We're seeing that things like plastic bag bans are very, very effective. They're able to shift behaviour very quickly at a very low cost. But there's a nuance here in terms of the role of government involvement and regulatory levers that can be applied that is really very important. And I think the new plastics economy work that we've been working on is really heading down a path of really trying to understand in very a lot of detail and with the economics, what is the complexity and what do we need to do across the value chain. We brought up the topic of post-use collection, and one of the challenges that we see is the notion of investability of infrastructure, particularly across Asia. And again, we're seeing the need for infrastructure to come in place, but we need to see both public and private participation in that, and the need for a way of thinking about this that captures the externality costs, and these start to get factored back into the equation as well. We're running out of time, but I just did want to do one quick run down the panel, and just if you would like to just comment on what you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges for the circular economy. This is an idea that has gathered a tremendous amount of momentum over the last several years, and it is I believe, a very nice example of the engagement of companies in starting to look at solutions through a lens of innovation and opportunity for the business, and doing this in a very collaborative way across the value chain and with governmental bodies. But I'd like to hear from your perspective on the opportunity and challenges, just very, very quickly.
Okay, sure. I spoke about opportunity in terms of us having a lot more touch point with our customer, so that we can then reach our positioning goal, which is a unique, trusted and meaningful brand, because then we allowed not just buying products, but allowing people to resell back their products to IKEA, allowing them to rent products from IKEA and returning after a certain use. So opportunity wise, that's where it is. I think I would like to focus a little bit more on the challenges. The biggest issue is that reverse logistics itself, I think as a concept, circular economy works perfectly, but the actual implementation of it requires a lot of coordination in the reverse logistics. Forward logistics has been pretty well developed in the economy of today. But when we look at reverse logistics, somehow the infrastructure of reverse logistics has not been able to catch up with the forward logistics. So being able to have enough take back and collection, bearing, of course, legislation coming in as well, because in certain countries, when you do take back, you're considered a waste management company. That requires a different license, and that has a whole set of different requirements depending on where you are. So that adds on another level of challenges that comes back.
A very nice example of regulatory influence there, that the definition of waste is a really important topic.
Exactly.
Peter, just briefly.
Yeah. Well, on opportunities, I'm thinking, I come back to the term collaborative innovation, because I'm thinking of, we got to be when we talk about the collaborative innovation of all parties, we got to elevate that to our R&D capabilities. I think we are still treating our R&D capabilities very in-house, very boundary, and therefore if we can open up the boundary and start having that capability to start leveraging, I think we'll see some very interesting technologies and development coming out to address to the circular economy. Challenges, I'll make it very brief, is about the term of working at the intersection of business, government, and communities, and I emphasize intersection. It's not going to be, I have a meeting with so-and-so government and then I'll connect with my customers. No, the team has to sit in the same design table and address the issues.
Very good. Roland.
I think there is good hope, and I'm very positive that we will be able to address this topic of circularity in the packaging industry. And the reason I'm so positive is that all players in the chain acknowledge that we have a big issue. And if you talk to raw material suppliers, to the packaging industry, to the FMCGs, to the government, everybody now acknowledges we need to do something. And that is the start of a solution, acknowledgement of the issue. I think governments are getting more and more serious about it. The Indian government, for instance, will pass legislation 2 years from now that insists that all packaging material need to be recyclable. And if you walk at certain beaches in Asia, well, you know, the problem is very visible, right? Why is Beijing closing down factories and so persistent on pollution? Because the city is simply impossible to live in anymore, so it becomes very visible. So I think all the parties see it as a problem, and now we need to start acting, work together, and initiate programs to fix this.
Good. Mark?
Well, I think a major opportunity is fintech, essentially, because if you look across the value chain, and we've heard a number of examples already on this, this is actually going to facilitate, I think, a major improvement. If you think of, for example, we've been working with a chocolate producer that has an extended supply chain all the way to the cocoa producers, smallholders, and you know, the ability to deliver microfinance through mobile phones is transformative. And you know, you combine that also with big data analysis, blockchain technology as well. I think we will be able to track what's happening through the value chain in a much more effective way. It will reduce the risk, it will reduce the cost of finance, and I think will stimulate from the bottom of the pyramid as well. So I think this is very exciting.
Very good. So I'd like you to join me in thanking the panelists for the discussion today. We didn't spend an awful lot of time on linking the discussion to the SDGs specifically, but I hope you appreciate the consequential benefits of a restorative and regenerative system cut across many of the SDGs. And we see this as a massive opportunity, and we're delighted to be working with all of these companies. So again, thank you very much. Thank you.